Hello, my name is Tim Newell, the Managing Director here at Harvest Investment Services. I'm coming to you today because of a crisis that we have all found ourselves in as a result of this coronavirus. Although everyone really across the globe is being affected in various different ways, and certainly here in the United States, most everyone is being affected in some way, shape, or form. We as business owners are affected in some different unique ways. Um, as a fellow business owner, I know that our challenges that we're thinking about is how do we make sure that we still have a viable business in place after this crisis has passed. And I too, probably like you, am convinced that this crisis will pass and we will get through this. But the challenge is how do we keep our business in place and functioning? How do we continue to pay our employees? How do we keep from laying employees off? How do we continue to pay them? How do we continue to have their benefits remain in place? And how do we keep a place of business? How do we pay the mortgage and the rent and the utilities? How do we keep all of these things in place so that once this crisis is passed, we still have a viable, profitable, ongoing business concern? Well, the good news is that our government has recently passed some bills that are specifically designed to help not only individuals that are going to end up receiving some paychecks or just checks in the mail. I wouldn't call it a paycheck, but a check in the mail. And also some components of those bills that are specifically designed to help us as business owners. These bills were actually passed unanimously most recently. When's the last time that's ever happened? And as I said, these bills have some specific areas that are specifically designed to help us as business owners. The first bill that was passed a couple weeks ago is called the Economic Injury Disaster Loan. It's being run through the SBA 7B program. And then the second one that was passed is called the CARES Act. It's also known as the Paycheck Protection Program, or the PPP, and that one will be run through the SBA 7A program. Now, each one of these different loans have different nuances that make one a little bit better for some things and the other one better for other things. The 7A program has a huge component to it that is pretty exciting, that if we use that loan for those purposes, paying our employees, keeping them in place, that we keep them in place, that we use it to pay our rent or our mortgage and our utilities, that most of or all of that loan can be completely forgiven. So, you know, our goal here at Harvest at this point is to come alongside of you as a fellow business owner and try to better understand these different programs that are out there and the different nuances that each of them have, and try to help you determine which, if either of these programs or both, might be beneficial for you to look into and apply for some assistance and apply for one of these loans. To do this, we have partnered with a good friend of mine, Don Rasmussen, based out of North Carolina. Don runs a firm, tax and consulting firm called Quartermaster Tax Management. Don and his team have a great deal of expertise at helping business owners like you and I and non-for-profit organizations in tax planning and high-end tax strategies. But they also have a lot of expertise in helping business owners like you and I determine which, if either of these two programs, that we could benefit from, and how we can go about applying for those programs. And they can actually help us by assisting in that application process. So with that, what I'd like to do is turn it over to Don Rasmussen and let him kind of walk us through these programs and give us some education on this. And I know this is going to be a little bit of a chunk of time, but I'd encourage you to take some time, take some notes, and I'll come back and close us up at the end. Thanks, Don.
Well, hey, Tim, thank you very much. Yes, we're grateful here to be having this conversation today about all this very, very important information that's it's hot off the press, if you want to call it that. It's just been released here in just the last few days. We're going to talk about how we can have a conversation today about helping your business in these very difficult times with the coronavirus and the financial situation around our country is very, very severe. And so what we've done is we've teamed up with Harvest Investments. We've worked with them and their clients on very sophisticated tax planning strategies on how to reduce their taxes and, of course, tax credits and rebates and such. But today we really want to put our focus upon what's most important, and that is the whole situation in our country over the coronavirus or the COVID-19. So a little bit about ourselves real quickly is just we are going to, again, focus on the SBA disaster relief and specifically two things, 7A and 7B. For small business owners. Now, there's some other things we could cover today, but just for time's sake, we really want to get into what's mostly on people's minds. We've heard it on the media. We've seen it in the news. We see everybody giving conversations and comments about it. We just want to get to the true facts about it and be able to help you in any way we can. So a little bit about ourselves. Of course, we have a specialized team of CPAs and accountants and tax strategists here in our offices, and we work with business owners all over the country. But you'll see something about our logo. It says Quartermaster Tax Management, powered by your CPA. We're not here to replace your CPA. We're here to come alongside them. So I like to use this illustration. A lot of times we'll have general practitioners, which are where we go for our medical care. But then you have your surgeons, your brain surgeons, or your cardiologists. That's where we would fall. We work with a lot of CPAs around the country who refer clients to us because, quite frankly, I have one who told me, listen, I just don't have time to do what you do. Matter of fact, on this whole SBA situation, the 7A and 7B, he's referring clients over to us as well because he said, listen, I just don't have the time or the bandwidth to really get deep into this here, and whereas we have. So I just want to say that we're not here to replace your CPA. We work with small business owners, churches, and ministries all across the country. Of course, we understand the unique financial challenges that small businesses face. So the reality is I've owned 3 CPA firms in my career, been doing this for 32 years. And what I realize is that the same things that we have dealt with over the years as a small business owner is the same thing that you're dealing with. And right now, we really want to make you the hero of your life and of your situation. And what I mean by that is right now you have customers who need your services. You have employees who are looking to you for some guidance on whether or not they're going to be able to stay employed, or if they're unemployed right now because you had to furlough them, when and if they're going to be able to come back to work. But then even more importantly is your family. Your family's looking to you, whether you're a mother or a father, they're looking to you to say, okay, are we going to be okay? Are we going to be able to pay for our bills and put food on the table? So my goal today, and what Harvest wants to do, is get this information out to you so you can be equipped to be able to address these concerns that you're facing these days. So, of course, as we know, disasters have come year after year. I was just talking with a professional out in Tennessee. And of course, the Nashville tornadoes came through here just a few weeks ago and just devastated Nashville. And the reality is we're all human beings. So most of us will just sit on the sidelines and let the world happen because it doesn't directly impact us. But what we're finding with this COVID-19, it's impacting everybody. Whether you're a small business owner, whether you're a ministry, or whatever it may be, it's affected our children because they're not able to go to school. So what we do know here, this is one of those crises that I've never seen in my 50 plus years, but the reality is it's impacting everybody. And no matter what age group, it's impacting them. So our government has gone to work, and our Senate passed it last week in our House, and then, of course, President Trump signed it into law on March the 27th. And so this is called the CARES Act. It's a $2.2 trillion benefit package. Now, I want to stress this here. This is not a stimulus package. We're expecting another what we call a tranche of funding to come out, but this is the beginning of this. And we're going to specifically talk about a section of this that's going to be very, very important for you and your business. But of course, it stands for the CARES, is Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act. And of course, it was created because of this situation called the coronavirus or the COVID-19, which has caused a lot of business owners. I just got off the phone with someone here recently. They're down 60%. I've talked to some who've shut their doors during this time. So again, depending upon what type of business you have, will determine to the severity of your impact. Now, for us, it's been extremely busy because there's a lot of people who need help, but that's not the case for most business owners. I can look out my window right now and see business after business, restaurants who only have the drive-through or the pickup, banks who only have the drive-through. So it's really impacted businesses in a very broad way. And our government realized that they need help. And so their goal was to get out at least $350 billion. And so that's why the CARES Act became law on March the 27th. So what are we going to talk about specifically? And I have it distinguished here as 7A, which is up in the top right-hand corner. And then we're going to get into the latter part, which is called 7B. 7A is the CARES Act, and it has some distinct benefits that come from it. The first one, and most importantly to most folks that I talk to, is the Payroll Protection Program. So the dates that it's considering is February 15th to June 30th. Of course, this was created by HR 748, Section 1102 is what gives us the guidelines of this particular law. Now, basic eligibility is any business concern, nonprofit, veterans organization, not more than 500 employees. Now, there's some exceptions to that. If you, let's say, for example, have a franchise, or you're in a restaurant and you have, multiple locations with multiple employees, there's some provisions in the code that allows you to take advantage of this as well. But for the most part, most of the business owners that I see coming into our practice, we're seeing below 500. So the Payroll Protection Act, there's actually one called the pension, but the Payroll Protection Program is available to any business already qualified as a small business concern, again, and as well as 501c3s. And then, of course, it covers tax-exempt nonprofits. And, of course, it is critical to note that on nonprofit tax-exempt organizations that you're a 501c3. So if you fall in that category, just make sure that you have that. I actually had a conversation with someone this morning as well who was not. And so, of course, they're not able to participate. So what do your payroll costs include? So they're looking at salaries, wages, and commissions. So if you do have a commissioned salesperson, that's part of it. Or maybe you have an employee who gets a base plus commission. It covers tips. So if you are in the industry that receives tips, that's part of it. Paid leave, healthcare payments. In other words, if you're providing healthcare coverage for your employees, that's going to be covered in it. Retirement benefit payments. Now, this is going to be important. I'm going to talk a little bit deeper about this here. But ultimately, if you're contributing to a retirement program, that time frame, that from those 8 weeks, that's going to be part of this plan. And then, of course, independent contractors, if you're a 1099. And then, of course, we're going to get into what it does not include. It does not include any compensation that exceeds $100,000. So let's say, for example, I was talking to a professional here a little bit ago who has about $150,000 of income. So when I talk about the calculation here in a little bit, you're going to find what's only going to be included is the first $100,000 of their income. Or if you have an employee who's what is considered a highly compensated, the first $100,000 will be part of the equation. The rest of it is excluded. So I want to make sure that's clear. So how they determine what you're able to borrow under this particular plan. And again, I want to stress that this is going to be through your local bank or a banking relationship that we have that we can connect you with. But ultimately, this is done through the bank. 7B is actually done through SBA and the U.S. Treasury. So distinguish it here. This is going to have to be done through a bank that offers the SBA loans. What they're going to do is they're going to take the last year, 2019, a 12-month period of your payroll. And you're going to add all that up and you divide it by 12. And so then you're going to take that figure and multiply it times 2.5. And I'm going to walk you through an example in just a little bit, but that creates what they call the loan cap, meaning that that's the maximum that you can get under this particular benefit. Now, again, if you have a very large payroll, then of course they even put a larger cap of that, and that's the maximum of $10 million. So if you have $1 million payroll per year, then of course you're not going to have to worry about that because of the loan cap. But again, we have some companies out there that have a very, very large payroll that this could be an issue. What can you use this money for? So you can use it for payroll costs, group health care benefits, and again, this is the portion that you're paying for, employee salaries, wages, commissions, and similar, payment of interest on your mortgage obligation. So if you own your building, now this is not your personal residence, this is your building that you're in or your buildings, the mortgage interest is going to be able to be calculated into this, or pardon me, you could use it for these monies for that particular case. Or if you don't own your building, you can use it for rent. So, and then lastly, utilities and any interest for debts that you incurred prior to February 15th. So let's say, for example, you have equipment loans, or maybe you bought the business. So the interest that's part of that, that's what's going to be able to be used to, this money to be used to pay for. So just keep in mind, these are the only things you can use it for. I've had questions from, can I pay off my mortgage, my school loan, all types of things? And the answer is absolutely not. If you don't adhere to this here, then we're going to talk about the forgiveness. You'll negate some of your forgiveness in the process because it has to meet the compliance requirements. So there is no requirement that the small business is unable to get credit elsewhere. So that just means that they're not going to require that you go out and look somewhere else first before you come to this program. So just keep that in mind. You don't have to worry about going through that. This is a non-recourse loan, meaning that they're not going to come after you. Now, if you use the proceeds for something that's unauthorized, as I was mentioning earlier, then that'll become an issue. So just keep in mind. And one thing that we encourage everyone is document what you use this money for, because that's going to keep you compliant to be able to, again, get some forgiveness, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. No personal guarantee is required. In other words, you don't have to personally guarantee this loan. No collateral required. So under 7A, there is no collateral required, whereas 7B, there is. So I just wanted to, again, distinguish in that situation. They do require a good faith certification. What does that mean? So that ultimately is just saying that you're attesting that because of the uncertainty of what's going on here, that the loan is necessary for you to support ongoing operations. So that's the number one that you're certifying. And number two, that these funds will be used to retain workers and maintain payroll or make mortgage payments, lease payments, or utility payments. So everything that's lined out inside of there for it to be used for, you're just attesting that, yes, I agree that I'm going to use it for these purposes and that you do need some assistance. Now let's talk about forgiveness. This is the one here that catches everybody's attention, is how, first of all, how does it work? Does it apply to me? And then, of course, how can I take advantage of it? So first of all, the loan itself is guaranteed by the SBA. The bank that offers it, whatever bank you go through, and it really is irrelevant as to which bank you use. I know some have relationships, they've been with a particular bank for a long time. They may or may not be offering this, but it really is not making much of a difference because the bank is going to provide the money, but the SBA is going to cover that loan in two different ways, as I'll talk about here in a second. The maximum maturity is 10 years after the date of the forgiveness. So let me give an illustration. Let's say, for example, you get approved on April the 10th, and let's say your forgiveness happens, let's say the end of May. So you have 10 years from the date of the forgiveness to be able to pay this back. So of course, there's no prepayment penalties. I've heard that question. The interest rate is capped at 4%. And so you don't have to worry about, I've heard some questions, well, I've heard it's going to go up to 12%. No, it's capped at 4%. So we know that's not going to exceed that. It may be a little bit less. It all depends upon, I'm sure, credit and some other factors that we've not been notified of. Deferment. So you can defer the payment for up to 6 to 12 months. And then, of course, that includes your principal, interest, and the fees. So, and then, of course, when talking about fees, there is no origination fee, meaning that you're not going to have to write a check or use any of your proceeds to cover this SBA loan. SBA is going to directly pay the bank for this process. So they're going to pay them a percentage of whatever they loan to you, and that's how they're going to be compensated. So there's going to be no cost to you to apply for this or originate this loan. Now the question comes up as far as overlap. So let's say, for example, you want to apply for the 7B, which we're going to talk about here in a second. Assuming you haven't done so at this point, then that's not going to create any problems. If you've already applied and been approved, that may impact how much you're entitled to under 7A, but it won't prevent you from applying for it. All right, so just keep that in mind about the overlap. Forgiveness. So what they do to forgive this, they're going to look at the principals forgiven in an amount equal to the following costs incurred during only the 8 weeks after the loan is originated. Now keep in mind that, remember, I told you they're giving you a factor of 2.5. So and that's ultimately 2.5 months is what they're looking at. So the reality is 2 months of this loan is going to be forgiven. The other half is going to be carried on as a loan if you meet all the qualifications, or you can just pay it off. It's up to you. But so they're looking at your payroll costs, your mortgage interest, your rent, your utilities. That sounds like a broken record. Or again, your interest that you pay on debt. So that's what they're looking for during that 8-week period, and that's what they're going to look at forgiven. So that's where documentation is extremely important. So keep in mind that if you've reduced the salaries or reduced the wages or the employees as far as being on staff, it's going to impact your forgiveness as well. I'm going to actually walk you through an example of that so you can see how that does. So the way it works is that if you decrease it by over 25%, then it is compared to last quarter, full quarter, then that's what they're going to look at as far as how it impacts your forgiveness part. So just keep in mind that if you have, now they're going to incentivize, as you're going to see in a little bit, for you to bring them back on the payroll and increase and to restore their wages. Again, excludes employees with annualized pay greater than $100,000. So again, I've already talked about that, so it does exclude those employees. So the reductions, there's an exemption for those employees rehired within 30 days of the enactment. So the enactment was on March the 27th. So if you hire them back, remember I told you about that 25% issue, that is an exemption to that reduction. And there's some calculations. There's a headcount test, and there's also a salary reduction test. So those are the factors. I don't want to get deep in the weeds with you, but that's going to help determine on if there's a reduction or not. So I'm going to give you an example. So whatever business it may be, I work with professionals, whether it's a chiropractor, or whether I was talking to a vein specialist down in Arizona last night, or maybe you have a coffee shop. It really doesn't make a difference what type of small business, as long as it doesn't fall into some of the exempt ones, which are, gambling and other things that would not be aligned with a typical loan. So small businesses with 27 full-time equivalent employees is my example. Annual payroll is $1 million, so that's $83,333 per month. That is their average, and that's what the calculation is going to be based upon. So they're going to take that figure, multiply it times the 2.5, and of course, that's going to give you $208,333. Okay. Then from there, in this example, this particular business, because of the economy and everything, they kept the 5 key employees, but they laid off everybody else. And the 5 key employees, their income amounted to $340,000 is what their annual compensation would be. So out of that $208,000 that was originated on April the 10th, of course, as we know, the small business had some unavoidable expenses during the following 8 weeks, and that's that 8-week period they're looking at. And so April, May, June rent was $55,800. We have utilities of $2,100, and then the salaries for the 8-week period is $52,308. And then they had some financed supplies that they had, so they had $20,000 of interest. So all that added up comes up to $130,208. So as it stands right now, if they didn't bring these employees back, that's what they're going to be able to get forgiven. But in this case, the shelter-in-place order has been lifted April 24th, or 2 weeks after the origination. They're going to bring some of their employees. So they bring back half of their hourly employees. The payroll for those hourly employees comes out to $39,600 for that 6-week period that's left over the snapshot, if we call it, of the period of loan. So we add the $39,600 to the $130,208, and so $169,808 of that $208,000 is now forgivable. So the question comes up, well, what about the other $39,000? Well, that other $39,000 would be still in that note at 4%, and of course you have 10 years to pay that off, or up to 10 years, let me rephrase that. Now, you can pay it off at any given time. There's no prepayment penalties or anything such as that, but just, whatever is not forgiven will be carried on in that note. But when you think about this here, in this particular case, over 80% of this loan has been forgiven, which is pretty substantial. So just keep that in mind. Whatever's left over is going to be carried over into the note at 4%. So I'm going to take a little, I don't want to say pause, but I'm going to take an interruption. I want to clarify that what I'm going to talk about right now is called 7B. This is the Emergency Economic Injury Disaster Loan Grant. And so this is going to go back to when we cover the 7B in a little bit. We're going to get a little bit more in depth. But this came out of the CARE Act, which has generally been covering everything for 7A. But there's a provision in there for this emergency grant. And so under 7B, which is a whole different application, basic eligibility, of course, is any business concern, nonprofit, veterans organization, or tribal business, not more than 500 employees, identical to the 7A. The borrower can request an advance of up to $10,000 to be provided within 3 days. So I want to stress that up to $10,000. So the first information that came out says, listen, it's a flat $10,000, but the reality is it's up to $10,000. And of course, when you apply for 7B, you have to specifically request it. That's actually in the new application, and I'll talk more about that in just a little bit. The advance can be used for providing paid sick leave, maintaining payroll to retain employees, meeting increased material costs that may have come up, making rent or mortgage payments, or repaying obligations which cannot be met due to revenue losses. So let's say, for example, accounts payable, things that have been coming along here outside of this particular these categories. So you can use it for those things as well. And of course, the advance does not have to be repaid even if the loan is subsequently denied. So let's say we're not talking about 7A being denied, we're talking about 7B. So 7B is, again, a separate application done through SBA, funded by the U.S. Treasury. So when you apply for that, like I said, once the application has been submitted and you request the grant, then of course that up to $10,000 is going to be provided to you within three business days after application. So just kind of keep that in mind. The payroll protection loan forgiveness is going to be reduced by this advance. So again, if you are going to be qualified for the $208,000, that $10,000 is going to be part of that equation. So if you apply for both, just keep that in mind, that is going to be part of your advance. All right, so back to 7A. So now we're going to move off to you as the business owner, your employees, your family. This is going to be some of the things that are outside of the payroll protection program. This is actually what you've heard a lot about, and that is the recovery rebates for individuals. So the way that works, it's $1,200 for an individual, $2,400 for married filing jointly. Now, there is a potential reduction of that. It's all based upon income. So one other thing, too, is if you have qualified children. So the qualified children is currently, if you're receiving a tax credit under the new tax laws, then they would be eligible under this particular provision. So let's assume that you have 3 minor children. Each one of those children, you're going to get a check for $500, plus your $2,400 if you're married. So you're almost $4,000, $3,900 that you're going to receive to yourself. Question comes up, okay, if I owe taxes, is this applied to that? The answer is no. So they're trying to get money out into the mainstream for you to use that to take care of your responsibilities, and also, to get it back out into the economy and get it back up on its feet. Now, going back to if you exceed $150,000 of AGI, adjusted gross income, married filing jointly, there's a 5% reduction, and the cap on this as far as income is $198,000. For a single, it's $75,000. Above that to $99,000, there's a 5% reduction. So if you have $1,200, a 5% reduction is not a whole lot. I mean, you're only looking at $60, but just keep in mind that that's going to be reduced. Okay. And then a little bit more details about that. Recovery rebates are treated as 2019 payments. Refunds may to be made as rapidly as possible. We're expecting between 2 to 4 weeks. Hopefully the soonest would be 2 weeks, as soon as they can, but 2 weeks would be ideal. I would say 4 weeks would probably be the latest. But you have to make sure, or let me say, they have to be received by end of this year here. No refund or credit shall be made or allowed under the subsection after December 31st. So again, their goal is to get it out to you as quickly as possible. And why would this be a possible situation is because of your filings. No overpayment of interest. And for those who have not filed 2019, this is kind of where I want to go to, is that it is going to be based upon your 2018 return. I've had some people who said, listen, you know what? I've not filed my 2018 return, which is interesting. But if you haven't, that's where either one of two things is you'll be able to get it a little bit later in the year, or they'll use your 2019 1099 to determine that you have income and that you're eligible for this. So just keep that in mind. Also, once the checks go out, they're going to send out confirmation letters later on this year, just to kind of give an outline of what was received. Now let's move off to the next one. Now, when I talk about this next topic, keep in mind this should be a last resort, and I'll tell you the reasons why here in just a little bit. But most importantly, this is money that you've set aside for the future. And doing this as many years as I have, your future gets here a lot quicker than you think. But this is a place that, listen, if it's about keeping the bills paid or the utilities taken care of, or putting food on the table, by Jove, this will be a place. I wouldn't suggest using this to go on a vacation after all this is passed, because that's really wouldn't be a prudent way of using it, but it's there for whatever you need, and I'll talk about the provisions of that. So there's a provision in the IRS code called 72T. And what it states is if you're under age 59 and a half and you take money out of your qualified plan, like an IRA or 401k, and you actually take a withdrawal, then you have a 10% penalty. So they've waived the 72T requirements, and so you can actually access up to $100,000 out of your IRA, as an example. And a person to meet this criteria has to be either diagnosed with COVID-19, a spouse that has COVID-19, or the looser guidelines, which is if you have experienced adverse financial consequences as a result of being quarantined, furloughed, or laid off, or having work hours reduced, being unable to work due to lack of childcare, closing or reducing hours of a business owned or operated, or other factors determined by the secretary. So as an example, in most states, at least particularly in North Carolina, they've have a stay-at-home requirement or shelter in place. So of course that would certainly fall in that category. So that's a pretty loose guidance on there, but I just want to let you know the likelihood is, I would say probably 95 to 99% of the people who take advantage of this will be eligible based upon these guidelines. Now, when it comes to the distributions have to be made this year. So you have till December 31st to make these distributions. So maybe you don't want to do it now, but if this thing continues on and getting your business back or whatever the case is, or getting things back in order, then of course you can access it later on in the year. Now, this is pretty cool. When I say this is that generally, if you were to pull out $100,000 out of your IRA, you're going to recognize all of that income on your tax return as ordinary income, just like you have another job, except that this is going to increase your tax liability substantially. So what they chose to do, which I think was very, very kind of them, is they do it on a ratability over 3 years. So that just means if you took out $100,000, you're going to recognize $33,333 a year for 3 years as taxable. Now, there is a way for you to kind of reverse this, and that is being able to pay it back. So you can repay it over that 3-year period. So ultimately, in our initial evaluation, so my example again, let's say you say you hadn't take it out, and you are getting back up on your feet, and you have the $33,000 here at the end of the year, and you say, listen, I'm going to put that back up in my IRA. For what we understand, that's going to nullify the tax implications for that particular year. And let's say you do it the next year and the next year. That way you're putting the money back up into your IRA, and you're not having to pay taxes on it. But it sure helped you to give you a kind of a temporary loan, if you want to call it that. And it does, they exempt out what we call the trustee to trustee rules, which means that if you're taking money out of an IRA and you move it to another IRA or another custodian, that's generally the only way to avoid having to pay that penalty and the tax implications. And if you're taking out of a 401k, there's a thing called withholding rules that they're mandated by federal law to withhold 20%. So if you're taking out of a 401k, not as a loan, but actually a withdrawal, then they would be mandated generally. That's all been waived, so the trustee to trustee rules don't apply, nor does the mandatory withholding. All right, so let's talk about retirement plans that you take a loan out. Now, this is interesting. So if you have a 401k or 403b in your business or ministry, just keep in mind that you can get a loan out of it. It has to be done within 6 months of the enactment. So that was March 27th. So ultimately it comes down to September 27th. It has to be done during that 180-day period. The limit used to be capped out at $50,000. Now it's $100,000. So again, very, very similar to the IRA. The difference here is that you're not taking the money out in the sense of you're withdrawing, you're actually just getting a loan against it, which does happen quite a bit in 401ks. Here's what is unique as well, is that it usually was kept at the 50% historically. Now you can take out 100% of the balance. So let's say you have $105,000 in your 401k, you can take $100,000, 100% or $100,000, whichever's less, out of there. So if it was $95,000 in your 401k, you could take the whole $95,000 out as a loan. So that was changed in the provision. The outstanding loan repayment can be delayed from a year end, and year end delayed 1 year. So meaning that between the enactment and the end of the year, it can be delayed 1 year. So if you take this distribution or this loan out, let's say, for example, in June of this year, then it's going to be 1 year of delay before you have to start making the payments back. All right, if you are over, or if you have a family member who's over age 70 and a half and they've been taking required minimum distributions, that has been waived temporarily. So there's no RMDs for 2020. So that would be more applicable to, and maybe you as a business owner, maybe you're still involved in your business. You don't have to take that required distribution out for this year. So let me talk a little bit about charitable contributions. I'll make it real brief here for my for-profit, but just kind of give you an idea. So on the above the line charitable contribution deduction. So generally, if you're going to take a charitable deduction, it has to go over to your Schedule A, which we call a below the line. So a Schedule A deduction. And that's where you take your mortgage interest and medical expenses and things such as that. Well, of course, under the new tax code, that was eliminated for many, many people because the higher standard deduction. But assuming you don't itemize, because you're not allowed to under this particular provision, now you're going to be able to take up to $300 and put it on the front page of your tax return and reduce your income based upon that $300. You cannot be itemizing. Like I said, that's one of the provisions. It's for 2020 as it stands right now. Must be cash. Now, when I say cash, that could be cash or check or a credit card. What it cannot be is appreciated assets such as stock or real estate. Not that you would, maybe stock you could do $300, but real estate generally not. But that's the caveat to that. And it cannot be a donor advised fund. You can't use a donor advised fund to make that contribution and take that above the line limit. It cannot double up. In other words, again, you cannot do itemization and take the $300 above the line deduction. That's not possible as well. Modification, and this is huge, of charitable contribution limits. So, and this is going to be a tremendous tax planning opportunity because that's what we do. But just keep in mind, we will be able to help as we get through this crisis, help many, many people really maximize this here now. And I'll kind of walk you through, not to get too deep in the weeds, but I'll give you kind of a vision of what that looks like. So up to this point under the new tax code, you could only take 60% for cash contributions. You could only take 60% of your contribution against your adjusted gross income. So if you made $100,000, the most you could deduct is $60,000 for your charitable contributions. Well, now they've raised it up to $100,000. So theoretically, you could make $100,000, give away $100,000, and wipe out all taxes and have a zero tax liability. So the question comes in: do you really want to take all of your income and give it to charity? Well, certainly, if you want to, you can certainly do so, and we would love to know that you're doing that. But the reality is, we can use some strategic tax planning in lieu of that. So again, I don't want to get deep in the weeds, but if you have some appreciated stock still left after this market, and you want to utilize this tool, you couldn't donate the stock to the charity or donor advised fund. You'd have to sell the stock and put cash into it. Now, what that has done, though, is you sold it at capital gains rates, and you're able to experience an ordinary income tax savings. So it's what we call a tax arbitrage. Again, I don't want to go any further on that, but that's something we'll want to look at as time goes on in this year and as we get back up on our feet and get moving forward. So if you have, let's say, for example, you were to do something like that and it was $150,000 that you actually contributed and you only make $100,000 AGI, that additional $50,000 will carry over up to 5 years. So it's just a carryover, and most likely you would use it the following year. So let's talk about business taxes. So if This is not S corporations. S corporations are pass through. So whatever you donate through your S corporation just ultimately shows on your K-1 and comes over to your personal tax return. And that's where you'll recognize that under your Schedule A. But if you own a C corporation, this is where it changes. So historically, corporations were limited to the 10% of your taxable income. Now it's been raised up to 25%. So again, this could be, again, another tax planning opportunity. But really what they're trying to do through all these provisions I'm talking about is encourage people that have the ability to do so is to give. Whether that's to your local church, whether that's to your synagogue, or whether that's the American Cancer Society or the food bank, is ultimately to help those who are facing very, very difficult times, and just to ultimately incentivize you through some tax savings. Food inventory. So if you are a business that donates food, again, in the past, you've only been able to take a 15% deduction. That's now been raised to 25%. Again, they're trying to incentivize for these companies who work in the food industry and have this type of stuff in their inventory that they can give out to, again, the food banks and we call it Second Harvest and different ones like that they can give out, and they can get that a larger deduction. All right, so I'm going to talk about this one here, and I will tell you the likelihood, if you're a small business owner, of you utilizing this is not quite as high as it would be for a much larger employer. So it's called the Employee Retention Credit. So again, they're trying to incentivize these businesses to keep employees on. And so the way they look at it is going to be 50% of qualified wages up to $10,000. So you're going to be able to get a $5,000 credit. This credit can be applied towards employment taxes, but it also is refundable. So again, if you've kept up to speed on your employment taxes, of course, it is refundable. Reduced for credits in section 7001, 7003. I don't have time to get in that today, but under the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, you can use this credit, but this would be offset under this employee retention credit. So this is for people who have been out sick because they have the coronavirus, they've been caring for somebody who has a coronavirus, or they're off because they have to care for children under age 18. Or they're furloughed or required to stay at home. So again, that's a little bit more conversation we can have if you like to, but it was passed actually about 2 weeks ago on the 18th, I believe it was, of March. And so the reality is this would just be an offset. Eligible employers' operations are suspended by government. Or significant decline in gross receipts. Now, so the definition of significant decline in gross receipts is, of course, open for interpretation, but I would say most businesses out there have had a significant decline and cannot claim this credit and take the forgivable SBA loan. That was what I was pointing out earlier. If you're a small business owner, you can't do both. So I would say that most of the small business owners are going to choose the forgivable part of 7A versus using this tax credit. So anyways, so that's everything on the 7A. Now we're going to move off to 7B. So 7B is different. Again, 7A is the Paycheck Protection Program. That's the main core of what this is. 7B is what we call working capital. So the one criteria is, first of all 50 states and the District of Columbia are currently covered. So that's the good news. And the reason why I'm bringing that up, that's good news, but there's some also specifics that we need to cover about. So the SBA 7B is referred to the EIDL, Economic Injury Disaster Loan, and we're going to talk about the basics. So what's the criteria for loan approval? First of all, you have to have a credit history, and as it stood when we started this process, it was 640 plus. I will tell you that there's been a lot of conversation that the SBA, because of this circumstance, is going to maybe loosening that up. That's not a promise. I can just tell you what we've been told through our resources. Repayment, they're going to be looking at your financials. They're going to be looking at last year's tax return. Want to make sure that you have the ability to repay this loan. So if you're a business owner that was in the red in 2019 for most of the year, that's probably going to have an impact on your ability to get a loan or the amount of the loan. Eligibility, and this is the key I wanted to point out, it's in all 50 states and DC, but you have to be in a declared county. So I'm going to show you an example of California, which is a very large state, and I'm going to show you the contrast. Us here in North Carolina, the whole state has been declared. In California, you can see here, there's a lot of counties here, but it's not every county in California. So what that means is that if your business location is located in the county that has been declared eligible, then you can apply for the 7B. If it has not, then you cannot at this time. Now, this changes on a daily basis, and I'm going to show you a little bit, a website that you can go to verify whether or not the location of your business or businesses are in counties that do meet the criteria of eligibility. So what businesses are eligible to apply? I've talked a lot about this already. Of course, this is going to be this is a working capital for small business owners, agricultural cooperatives, aquaculture businesses, and private nonprofit organizations. This also includes small businesses that are directly affected by a disaster or businesses that are indirectly affected. So that could be maybe because of the losses in their community. How much can you borrow? $2 million. And I'm going to reiterate this a few times through my presentation just because of the confusion sometimes we see between the B and the A. But this one here is a loan. It's not based upon your payroll, like the calculation we did under 7A. This is going to be looking at, again, the overall financial picture of your business. So $2 million the maximum. The interest rate for for-profit is 3.75%. For nonprofit is 2.75%. Of course, eligibility for these working capital loans are based on size and type of business and financial resources. So they're looking, again, a very much broader snapshot. That's why when we're putting all this together for our clients, we're having to provide, tax returns, profit and loss statements, business balance sheets, those type of things to kind of give it an idea of the repayment ability and about the amount you can borrow. So you can use these loans for the most part about everything else. So they can be used for paying your fixed debts. They can be used for your payroll. Again, maybe what wasn't covered under the PPP. Accounts payable, some bills that you owe, and other bills that would have been paid had the disaster not occurred. And so again, I generally think of a lot of people who have maybe accounts payable. I work with business owners. I have a manufacturer here in Charlotte that has a lot of AR. So if somebody has an accounts payable out there to pay them for their manufacturing of the different things that they do. But the loans are not intended to cover the lost sales or profits or an expansion. So as much as I love to say that they would try to help you there, the reality is because of the needs out here, they have capped it out saying, well, listen, lost sales or profits are not our concern. It's basic essentials to keep your business alive and to thrive. And of course, any type of expansion. I actually work with a professional who just put in 2 new locations and was putting 2 more in this year. Well, that may or may not happen on the other 2 because of what's transpired. Again, just kind of reiterate, it's called EIDL. You'll hear that quite often. It's $2 million. And again, there's some certain circumstances or situations, particularly for larger companies, that could be increased. But right now, for most small business owners, it's going to be $2 million. 30 years is the maximum you can use to pay this back. But I generally see 7 to 15 is generally what we see. Interest rate, again, 3.75 and 2.75 respectively for nonprofits, typically monthly. So that's generally the payback time frame. So you start monthly, but there is, of course, a deferment. Based upon the old plan, it was the interest still accrued. Whether or not they're going to make an exemption on that under this current crisis, I would not be surprised that they won't do that. In other words, kind of like what they're doing on the 7A is a deferral of interest as well. SBA does not charge points, closing costs, or service fees. Again, just like under the 7A, you're not going to have to pay any type of fee to acquire this loan. Historically, it's been about 30 days, but I will tell you, they've changed the application 3 times since last Thursday. Matter of fact, we're making some revisions on the application process as recently as this morning. They've changed it, and because of that, it's because of the demand. The first part of it was the website kept on crashing. The government may be doing great things to get some money out into the marketplace, but they're not very good at building websites to take a lot of traffic, I can tell you that. But ultimately, then they change it to where, again, same documentation, except instead of you having to put it into the application online, they said just upload the documents. And as most recently as late as Sunday evening, they changed it once again. What you will upload things into, you'll enter stuff into the computer as a preliminary or initial application, and then they'll ask for more stuff as time goes on. But we're expecting this is going to probably push it out a couple extra weeks, if not longer. So we're probably looking closer to 6 weeks, maybe as high as 8 weeks, just based upon demand. And again, the first check is $25,000. This is aside from the $10,000 advance that they're talking about. The other $25,000 will happen after 5 days once you've been approved. And of course, subsequent payments will come based upon the loan officer. Anything over $25,000, the first $25,000 is unsecured. Anything above that is going to require collateral. So again, they're big fans of real property. So your building that your offices or your business is in, it could be your residence, it could be rental property, it could be machinery. But I just want to tell you that does not prevent you from getting a loan if you do not have collateral, but they're going to look for that as a security and assurance that they're going to be paid back. So again, reiterating on this here, it does not decline a loan based upon or the lack of collateral. It's going to be making sure that you can keep the pledge that you have made to the SBA. So what's the other criteria that's involved when it comes to applying for this loan? Must have a physical presence in the declared disaster area. Remember, we talked about the county. So if your state, the whole state's not designated, then you need to be very cognitive of what county you're in. Now, I'll give you another example. So we're here in North Carolina, and south of Charlotte is the South Carolina border, and there are communities alongside there. So you have like Fort Mill or Rock Hill, so let's assume that, like in North Carolina, let's say you live in Charlotte, but you commute down to South Carolina to operate your business. And let's assume that Fort Mill, which I believe is York County, is not part of the designated area. So because your business is located in Fort Mill, you wouldn't be eligible to apply for 7B, even though your residence is in North Carolina. So just keep in mind, want to double check that website, that if your whole state has not been designated as disaster, then you need to make sure that you're in the county. And it does not, if you have a PO box, is not sufficient to meet that requirement. Okay. How are working capital loans that are different from other SBA loans? First of all, this one here comes directly from the U.S. Treasury. It does not come from SBA itself. It's just being underwritten by SBA. They don't go through a bank. Again, 7A, you go through a bank. 7B, you do not. And of course, you're going to go directly to the website. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to walk you through the process of applying online for this particular loan. And so you're going to go to disasterloan.sba.gov/ELA because this is going to be the place you want to go to start this process. And of course, there is no obligation to take the loan if offered. So I tell every one of my clients, I said, listen, it's better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it. We do not know how long this is going to go on. And we already know what the limitations are of 7A, the 2.5 times your monthly payroll. And so this one here is to fill the gaps. But again, we don't know how long. But like I said, if you had the money aside there, and let's say you get back up on your feet in the next 30, 45 days and you don't need it, you just don't take it. And then, of course, I'll talk about if you don't need all of it or if you need more. Again, the maximum unsecured is $25,000, and you can have another SBA loan, but you just cannot combine them. They all sit on their own separate chassis. You just can't combine them or bring them together. I want to encourage you to submit your application as soon as possible. Once you watch this video, and if you want to do it yourself, I encourage you to do so. But here's the key: recheck your information. Make sure your T's are crossed and your I's are dotted, and also make sure all your supporting documentation is provided, because what we find is the biggest reason for delays in the processing is due to missing information. So kind of think through this here. We got over 10 million business owners in the United States. They're all vying for 7A and 7B. So you can imagine it's kind of like rush hour in Los Angeles or Chicago. It's a madhouse, and they're all trying to get through this little toll road like you have up in Chicago. And so that's kind of what we're seeing here. We're seeing all these people trying to get in here and trying to get in and get these loans approved, whether it's at the bank or through this one here. Well, let's say you get up to that toll road and you don't have the change. And so they said, well, pull to the side here and you can root around in your car and see if you can find the change to get through this toll. assume you don't have an easy pass. And so you're going around here and finding this here, and you're saying, okay, how do I get back in line to get this thing, to get through the toll road? Well, that's ultimately the same thing we're looking here. Is we don't know how long or how easy or how difficult it's going to be to get out of the waiting side of put on the sideline to get back into the queue and move on down the road, and how many more people have gotten ahead of you because of that. Now, I received a message this morning from actually one of my clients up in Virginia, and her comment to me was, the scuttlebutt between them, and there's a bunch of doctors, what they are, well, there's not enough money to go around. Well, again, as I said earlier, this is just the first part. We're expecting actually a stimulus package of more funds coming, but they needed to get something out there, and that's why the urgency to put some money out there. And it's, quite frankly, I was telling actually my wife this morning, I said, I really see this kind of as an image of like a lighthouse. So, what we're doing with our clients and the people we talk to is to say, okay, we're providing a ray of hope in the storm that's going on. But that's what the government's trying to do, is say, listen, you know what? You are going to make it, and we're going to try to help you out as much as we can. There's certain limitations, but this money is not going to cover everything. We've got to, get back up on our feet, but they're going to have to contribute some more. But just know there's a lot of people going to be vying for this money. If more funds are needed, I can tell you that you can submit supporting documentation to request that, but also you can, if you say, listen, they authorize 100,000, we're back up on our feet, I don't need all 100,000, you can have them reduce that loan as well. If you are denied, we have an appeals time of 6 months. So we'd have to get, again, additional documentation and a written request for the appeal. All right. So again, I'll reiterate one more time, under this particular plan that was released here a few weeks ago, it's only $8 billion. So you want to make sure your application is flawless. Make sure, I actually was on with an organization today. What he did is he went on there and he screenshotted everything and then had me review it. Now, I can't do that for everybody, and our team can't do that for everybody. This is actually a personal friend of mine. And I said, his name is Val. I said, yeah, Val, here you need to change this, this, and this. And then he submitted it. But he just wanted a second set of eyes. So I would encourage you that if you're going to do this yourself, get a second set of eyes. Maybe that's your CPA or a trusted advisor, someone who can look over it just to make sure you didn't miss anything. We just don't want you to get pushed out of line. So that, again, that's your first option. You can do it yourself. Some things to consider, particularly under 7A, is, we got 10 million business owners who are going to be vying for this here. The banks, of course, are sadly understaffed because the drive-through windows is really what they were looking for, and you could only, you'd have to get an appointment to get inside there. So that's a concern that we have, and I've heard different things here. Some banks have been proactive that have long-term relationships who are reaching out proactively to their customers. But the most people I talk to, like I talked to someone up in New Jersey today, and that is they're having a hard time getting in, getting a conversation going because, the phones are ringing off the hook. The disbursement of these funds must be done properly and within that 8-week time frame and documented properly in order to be forgiven. I want to stress this one more time. Once you get that 7A, make sure you document that you're using it for the proper purposes, because that could impact, well, let me say, if you don't, it'll do it documentation properly. It could impact, and it will impact how much you get forgiven. And so we want to maximize what that looks like. Again, like I said, a lot of the banks are remote these days here. Like, for example, there's a large bank called Wells Fargo, and I of course, bank at one of these here. So if I went down to my local branch, most of these folks that handle SBA are at another branch, a larger branch, not done at the local level. They're understaffed, as I said earlier. Some can't even work remotely, meaning that doing everything via technology. Security implications, of course, phone lines, and then of course everyone wearing a face mask. What I've heard back from some of our clients is say, listen, I don't want to have to go down there. How do I avoid from having to go down there and maybe subject myself to, whether it's a bank employee or someone else who's in the building, to this coronavirus? So a lot of issues that come into play and the concerns. 7B, again, very, very simple. When I say simple to get to the application, maybe not so simple in completing it. I've heard lots of different thoughts and comments about that, but ultimately you go to, again, the website, disasterloan.sba.gov/ELA, and you can get your FAQs, frequently asked questions, as well as applying online. But I want to encourage you, even if you do that, this is a hard copy. I would print off a hard copy and make sure that you complete this and get all the supporting documentation, just in case their site goes down, because that has been historically their issue. What you're going to need is Form 5 or 5C. 5C is for self-employed, if you file a Schedule C on your tax return. The 4506, which is an IRS form, that's your tax transcript. Complete copies of most recent federal income tax return. I received a message a little bit before I got on this call here, and that was, I don't have my 2019 done. Well, what can I do instead? Of course, they're going to allow you to provide a P&L and balance sheet from 2019, schedule of liabilities, Form 2202, personal financial statement of 413, and other information. Like I said, that could be, one other thing, if you have multiple partners or principals inside your business, is going to require this information on you individually in duplicate. So let's say you have two partners, we need to have this information on both partners. The business information is one and done. And so just keep in mind that, and if you have multiple businesses, you'll have to apply individually because each one stands on its own tax ID number. And so whether that's 7A or 7B, if you're going to apply, they're going to look at those individually. Again, most recent federal income tax return is what should be, if you don't have your 2019, be your 2018 plus P&Ls and balance sheet from 2019, and a current year-to-date P&L statement. Now, I want to, when going through this new application, they're actually asking from January 1st to January 30th when they're looking to like payroll for 7A. And so just keep that in mind. It has been year to date, but I would say run that one from January 1st to, and actually it's kind of a rolling 12 months is what they're looking for to be able to fill that application out. And then Form 1368, which is ultimately looking over the last year of your month-to-month sales and cost of goods. So this is a report, if you use QuickBooks, very easily to run. It's just a month by month, so they can see kind of a track history up until this new application. Not to say they won't go back to it. We had to go back 3 years. So that would be 17, 18, and 19. So as under the new application, it looks like they're trying to streamline it with only 1 year, but that's what that is referring to. And then, of course, you'll take that information and put it onto 1368. Again, take a snapshot of this, a screenshot, whatever it may be. That's the website. But then also I would encourage you, like I said, to print it off, have the documentation just in hand in case we have some more issues with the website. Then you can print it off, put it in FedEx or UPS, and send it with a signature required. That's just a good way of making sure someone has signed off for it. You have a record and you know when that time frame is starting. Because remember, it's 3 days from after you apply that you can receive up to $10,000. This is the portal. So you look here, you got eligible disaster areas. This is to confirm that your county is currently in that. Applying online, and of course, check status. So the second option, well, listen, we want to encourage people to go ahead and do it. You know, if you have, I call the intestinal fortitude, and have the ability, the time, you know, you can do it. I would say that probably 90% of the people that we come in contact through doing these webinars are taking the challenge. Now we do have some who come back and say, listen, I don't want to do this anymore. I'll let you do it. But we do have it as an option. So you can use Quartermaster to do that. We have a great team of experience to maximize, you know, the loan potential and the loan forgiveness. We'll check for mistakes. We'll double check and triple check. We actually have a process of how we do that. And then lastly, before we even submit it, we're going to have you review it just to make sure, along with us, just to make sure that, you know, everything that you've given us was accurate, and in case anything changed. It takes us about 15 minutes, and then we just hit the submit button and you're off to the races. It is turnkey, so if you do choose to engage us to do so, we can do both 7A and 7B, as I'll talk about here in a second. But ultimately, we want to keep your involvement to a minimum. Now, there is work on the upfront of getting the information we need, but from there, we'll take it and we'll get everything completed and packaged up for you. If you want to utilize our services, you can go to our website, which is getcovidaid.com/harvest. Again, getcovidaid.com/harvest. Now, what does it involve if you choose to use us? Well, our consulting. So that's a few things here, and I'll just kind of walk through here. Your ministry, your business for a grant, loan, tax, and credit opportunities because of the CARES Act and COVID-19. Organize and reviewing existing tax returns and financial data. Perform necessary calculations to estimate financial impacts of tax credits. Collect and formatting supporting information for any loan, grant, or tax credit. Gathering and preparing documentation, and of course, maximizing the forgiveness amount through proper compliance monitoring. That's something we feel is very valuable, because if we can maximize your forgiveness, let's say, for example, you have a $200,000 loan, and we can maximize by saving you an extra $10,000 of having to be paid back, that's $10,000 of free money for you. So that's really important in our perspective. Under the loan application, we're going to identify appropriate loan offerings, prepare loan documents, an application to submit either to your particular bank and your bank officer, or maybe a relationship that we have. Obtain monthly sales figures that are necessary for that, preparing the pro forma P&L, personal financial statements for application, schedule of liabilities, assistance in completing all the loan documentation, and then answering the questions from SBA. Now, there's some things we can't answer, but our goal is to receive and to field the bulk of them, and we'll only reach out to you if necessary. So the SBA recommends a fee, because of the work that goes into this here, of $2,500. So what we've done two options. Number one, you can just do the 7A, which is $1,000. 7B, if you want to do that one, because there is more involvement there, that's $1,875. Or we'll do both. As a combination for those who are on this webinar with Harvest, is $2,275. So because it makes it a little bit easier for us to be able to have all this information together to complete both. Now, the 7A, I will tell you, asks for other things that the 7B does not, like articles of incorporation and operating agreement and things like that, that require more work on our part. But for the core, we're able to utilize that on both sides, and that would be like tax returns and P&Ls and things such as that. So $2,275 if you want to choose to engage us. If you choose to do so, then you go to the website. It's going to look just like this here. And then you're going to come down here. I don't have time to go into the tax credits for employees on leave and tax rebates, but these are some things that we would include automatically if you choose to use us. Now, from a triage standpoint, we're going to focus on getting the tax rebates and the help that you need now. These tax credits and tax rebates are going a little bit further on. But you can select all or which one you want to use. It's going to take you to this page here, where you're going to put in your first and last name, mobile number, and email. Now, why do we ask for your mobile number? Because some of this information is extremely time sensitive. So, emails, listen, I have a client particularly comes to my mind. I think he only checks emails once every 4 or 5 days, because I'll say, oh man, I'm sorry, I didn't check your email, and it's been sitting out there for like a week. So we want to make sure that this information, because of the sensitivity of getting you the money, we want to make sure we can get a hold of you. Then it's going to take you over here, and this is going to require some certain documentation here. This may have changed a little bit just because of the new that's just passed here, or new application that just was created here yesterday. So of course you'll see this will look very, very similar to this here. It is DSS compliant, PCI, HIPAA, 256-bit. I also want to stress to you that if you get in here and you're trying to upload something and the file's too big, there's going to be a link up here specifically that's going to say, if your file will not upload, you click on here and it'll give you a direct link into our system. So kind of in the summary of today's conversation are the two things that are on everyone's mind. The Paycheck Protection Program, the PPP as we refer to it, and the EIDL, which is Economic Injury Disaster Loan. So on the left-hand side, as you can see, payroll expenses are covered, employee salaries, mortgage interest, rent and utilities, interest on debt incurred prior to February 15th. You take that, your payroll, average payroll for 12 months, multiply it times 2.5, that gives you what your loan amount will be. 4% is the cap on the interest rate. You have a 6 to 12 month deferral, and 100% of it potentially could be forgiven. On the right hand side, again, payroll, fixed debts, accounts payable, other expenses that can be paid, could not be paid because of disaster impact, up to $2 million. And again, there's some exceptions for some larger companies, 3.75 for profit, 2.75 for nonprofit, up to 30 years, and none of it's going to be forgiven. So that's kind of give you a summary of what we talked about today. I want to say thank you very much for being on today. Thank you very much, Tim, and everybody at Harvest. Our goal is to help as many as we can during this very difficult and challenging time. And of course, once we get through this, then of course we're going to have conversations on how we can help you in the tax planning part of it. Again, not to replace your CPA, but there's one saying I use all the time. It's not how much you make, it's how much you keep. And that's the area that we focus on. We have 5 CPAs on our team, accountants, former IRS agents. And again, our goal is to keep more of that hard-earned money in your pocket. Again, thank you very much. If you have questions, what we'll do is we've created a couple PDFs that Harvest can get out to you. One is a comparison of A and B and kind of the guidelines I talked about today. And then also an FAQ, just some of the questions that we've been getting from professionals and business owners and ministries around the country. And of course, if you do have any questions above and beyond that, we prefer that you go there first, just because our bandwidth. I start at 5 in the morning. I've been going till about midnight in just handling emails and phone calls and just stuff that needs to be done. So I would encourage you to go there first. If for some reason you can't get your answer there, go to info@quartermastertax.com, and someone on my team will be in contact with you very, very soon. Again, Tim, thank you very much. Look forward to helping each and every one of you. And again, we encourage those who can do it on your own. If not, we're here, and we look forward to assisting you in this process. Thank you very much, and have a great day.
Thank you, Don. That was extremely helpful. Thank you for taking the time to go through all the detail. My guess is that you're probably still going to have some unanswered questions related to these 2 different programs. Feel free to reach out to me via phone call or email. You can email me easily at tim@timnewell.com. Almost forgot my email address there for a minute. Or you can just go to the website, getcovidaid.com/harvest. You can see the website there on the screen, and you can just check which one of those programs that you might be interested in. Don kind of walked you through the process. If you're interested in having Quartermaster Tax help you with the application process. They will also walk through those different programs and help you to identify which one of those would be best for you to apply for, if not both of them. We thank you for taking the time, and we're praying for you, and we pray that you will be safe and be healthy, and we look forward to serving you in other ways in the future. Thanks, and God bless.